Just
Sorry, okay.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Hare Krishna, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you. This is our first installment of the seminar. We'll be doing it monthly. And we'll just do some brief introductions and maybe why we're having these seminars. Yes.
You're standing again after that.
Interesting.
Okay, so this seminar series will be an exploration of key principles and practices of spiritual care from a Bhakti perspective. Today, we're not entering so much into the Bhakti specific components, but we will give a little glimpse into that. Today is more an introduction in terms of what is spiritual care and key theories, practices, and engagements of spiritual care.
And my name is Kula Pradeep, and this is Dina Bandhu. And I'm a chaplain, a hospice chaplain for VNA, which is the Visiting Nursing Association. So I have one section of New Jersey, which I cover, and Dina.
Yeah. In most recent times, I've served as a chaplain in a psychiatric setting, behavioral health setting. There's a large state hospital in New Jersey that I've worked at for the past 7 years or so.
Does everybody hear us okay? Is that noise or anything? Is there echo of any sort? I did do a couple of sessions at the Bhakti Center about spiritual care. There were 2 Sundays. I did a 2-part series, and it's kind of giving an introduction of spiritual care and why I thought at least our religious community could benefit from what we gained. This, I would say, that's still a motivation, but I think that spiritual care has a very broad application. And if anybody here works in healthcare or is a caregiver, spiritual care is a huge factor. I don't think, well, we'll probably get into it today in like healthcare industry. Both of us are in healthcare. Before I started doing hospice, I worked in a university hospital in Newark, and it was a very busy hospital. But it's becoming more of a standard for a lot of our healthcare settings to have a medical team, of course. You have nurses, all the nurses do so much. My mom was a nurse and advice, but you have social work, mental health, and now they're requiring spiritual care, spiritual health. So there's this quality assurance organizations that go check. For hospitals, called the Joint Commission, they make sure that they have a chaplaincy representative. So it is a requirement these days in terms of health, and what our perspectives of care have changed a lot past 20 to 50 years. So,
I would just briefly add to that there's a more holistic model of care that is emerging, and there's an understanding that doctors may care for physical ailments, physical issues. We have, of course, psychology and other disciplines that address more mental happenings and issues of one's mind, and then also the full person has to be addressed. So this is where spiritual care comes in, where chaplains deal most prominently with heart and soul, you can say.
Okay, yeah, let's start. Okay. Maybe we could start, I don't know, does anybody want to have, you guys want to introduce yourself, or you just want to be kind of anonymous? That's okay, because it's a small group, I think it's okay. Would you like to go around, do you like to start?
Sure. Just name.
Yeah, name or what brought you? Yeah,
Hi, my name is Sari. It's nice to meet you. I live on Long Island. We've come here for some programs in the past, and the reason I'm here is because I'm finding my way through Bhakti. My daughter passed away almost 4 years ago, and she was 23. So it's been a weird way to get here. Well, a terrible way to get here, but that's why I'm here.
thank you.
Hi, my name is Danny. Nice to meet you. I am Sari's soul sister. I dealt with my niece passing away too, and as right after she passed away, I had her. I'm in remission now, but during cancer, I actually looked at it as an opportunity to be closer to Krishna. So I looked at it as Krishna's mercy. Tried to look at it as Krishna's mercy. So I was hearing for myself, but at the same time, right before that, and since the elders in my family are becoming sickly, and I'm caring for an aunt, and for my daughter who has some issues as well, and I just think that this would be beneficial. And my other aunt is a rabbi, and she does chaplaincy, and I have discussions with her about that, where we discuss Judaism and we discuss Christian consciousness. So we have these wonderful conversations, and I'm just very interested, if not chaplaincy, definitely just for personal use within my family and friends.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rajrani, and I have been. This is important to me, and I've helping these guys try to bring this to life. I think that the more that we get the skills to sort of be there for each other, I think people really want to, but don't necessarily know how to do it. That's scale up the community. That we're not leaning on one person in particular, but every have some skill. So I'm actually really excited with this here now.
Thank you.
Roger, it's been incredibly helpful in preparing and getting us to this point of getting everything together.
Thank you a lot. Okay.
It's Janvi, and I'm his wife. And so I think everyone was running and I think that spiritual care is really vital. I've actually been part of the Bhakti Center community for the last 4 or 5 years. I used to actually stay here, just 2 floors up. I was living here for a couple of years, and I think I've experienced growing up in community as well. The problems that you think about, there is a lot of spiritual care, a lot of education, and us knowing how to care for each other. So I'm really excited that this is happening. No matter how small our group today, I don't believe that this can be very profoundly impactful in this.
Thank you.
And yeah, I'm just very fascinated with this topic. I think it's like the strongest base of care we can hold. And yeah, I've just been noticing for me personally, few months, like I've been neglecting care for myself, but I've been focusing a lot on like focusing a lot on with my body care, like that's essentially where I'll go. So I need to I need to do this, I need to clean, but always in the back of my mind, so that this is never going to be complete unless I'm really bringing up my spiritual.
And I also have someone who I consider to be a teacher figure who is about to transition out of their class, so it's very soon. So I'm hoping to be able to utilize some of the knowledge to not only use it for myself, but to serve others. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I'm Julian, I'm a friend of these gentlemen, and yeah, pretty excited to hear what you guys have to say. We've got a lot of talks in the past and a close friendship, so we've talked about things like this, and just really excited that this is happening.
Just your, if you like, your name and what inspired you to come to this event.
When I saw the two words spiritual care, I was just like, okay, I definitely feel like I don't really have a routine. Like, maybe I think I do, but I really don't. Really excited to see what you guys
Thank you so much. All right, okay, yeah,
And we have a couple of participants online, just so you be aware.
okay. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, it's online. Thank you so much for joining. And we will have space, when we open up discussion, that the people who join virtually are also very welcome to weigh in.
Yeah. So we'll start with like just a welcome prayer. Basically, they're the English translations of prayers we don't say. But there is a component to these prayers. The first prayer you may have heard and then both of them are prayers to our teacher, but they also have this kind of component of the teacher as kind of health or care that the student has no sight, but through the guru, the teacher, that they're given the sight. But they say that the chakshu shalataya is like an ointment that's applied to the eyes. And then Mukam Karoti Avachana, the teacher can inspire someone who cannot speak to speak, or give them the speech to speak. And for a person who has trouble, who cannot walk, that they can climb. So I like those prayers because even though the regular prayers we say, they are definitely the concept of healing. And yeah, from the teacher, the transcendence knowledge give us healing. And then
Then the following prayers are also prayers that we traditionally offer at the beginning before sharing some spiritual topics, and they are prayers dedicated to different teachers and different incarnations within our tradition. So we'll share this prayer. When will Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada, who is established within this material world, the mission to fulfill the desire of Lord Chaitanya, give me shelter under his lotus feet? So Srila Rupa Goswami is one of the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, who shared so many beautiful teachings of spirit. As we engage with a discussion of spiritual knowledge, as he is such a preeminent giver of spiritual knowledge, we wish to seek his shelter. The next is, O most munificent incarnation, you are Krishna himself, appearing as Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. You have assumed the golden color of Srimati Radharani, and you are widely distributed pure love of Krishna. We offer our respectful obeisances unto you. So, Mahaprabhu, of course, within our Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, is, we can say, the Ishtadeva, the form of the Lord within the heart that we aspire to carry with us. And he is exceptionally merciful. He is exceptionally compassionate. His quality is daya, or mercy. So in this way, as we discuss spiritual care, how to serve others, how to give love to others, we look to him as an inspiration. And finally, this is a prayer to Krishna. Oh, my dear Krishna, ocean of mercy, you are the friend of the distressed and the source of creation. You are the master of the gopis and the lover of Radharani.
I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Krishna's designation as friend of the distressed is most heartening. There's one acharya, I'm forgetting the name of that particular acharya who said this, but he speaks about how when he hears that Krishna is Bhakta Vatsala, when he hears that Krishna is the friend of his devotee, he feels very discouraged because he feels that he's not a devotee. Yet, when he hears that Krishna is Dinabandhu, the friend of the distressed, he became very happy because he knows that Krishna will be with him.
Start. So first thing, I think the first slide is a definition, right? We're looking at definitions.
Yes.
Okay, we can start.
So we're sharing, we can call them preliminary definitions because of course, as we continue in this seminar series, as we go deeper even today, the definitions will hopefully take on more nuance and open up and blossom. But these are preliminary guidelines so that we can kind of all be on the same page as we enter into the conversation. So we'll be defining spiritual care, chaplains, and chaplaincy, because we'll be throwing these terms around. So this is something that's not really a hard definition, but it's a statement that we found in the Handbook of Clinical Neurology, actually, that just very nicely we felt summed up what it is that spiritual caregivers do and what chaplains do in the clinical setting. So their ability to sit with a patient and their family and explore the complex emotions felt, from frustration to fear, guilt to grief, and all possible expressions of love is crucial. In the modern era, pastoral care has broadened from a singular focus on religious faith to all aspects of the spirituality of the person.
So actually the definition of spiritual care, sorry, yeah. So I was like, what are you doing?
I'll find you.
I understand. It is actually difficult to find definitions of spiritual care. As we go through, we'll see why. And the history of chaplaincy also leads to that kind of difficulty in finding definition. And the way that health and care has changed, as we said earlier, in the past 50 years. But if you notice, like, why did we find the definition in the Handbook of Clinical Neurology? Why isn't there a handbook of pastoral care? Because there are a lot of them are coming from different traditions. There's a history that's kind of well embedded in Christianity and may not necessarily have a universal application. But apart from that, some of the terminology has been dated. So there needs to be a new definition for spiritual care.
So this is just our humble attempt to kind of sum up some of the key elements of spiritual care. So spiritual care is a discipline and means by which caregivers help people to get in touch with their deepest sources of meaning and take shelter of their spiritual resources in times of difficulty or in the day-to-day. It revolves around presence, listening, and allowing people to share at a deeper level. So spirituality in this case can be something very, very broad. We can sometimes define spirituality as what people find to be most meaningful in their life. So in this way, as chaplains, as spiritual caregivers, we take a very broad approach in the sense that we are more focused on helping the people we serve to shelter of what is already with them, what they already find to be meaningful and a shelter for them, rather than, and we'll get into this, but rather than kind of imposing something directly. It's much more a matter of spending time with people, allowing them to make contact with what it is that has always accompanied them. And perhaps we can help them to see it more clearly or help them to make stronger contact with it. So this is just one emphasis there. And also, as we'll go into in more detail, presence, listening, and allowing people to share. These are key components. So now we'll define chaplain. So chaplain is a spiritual caregiver who has received specialized training, most often clinical pastoral education, we get a CPE. It's kind of, we can say, the standard of training that we find most often for those who serve as chaplains. And who functions within a larger secular institution such as hospital, hospice, behavioral health facility, prison, military, etc. So with this definition of chaplain, we can speak about chaplaincy, which is even more, as Kula was saying. Sometimes these things get a little bit risky, a little hard to grab onto, actually a hard concept, but it's because it's so expansive. So what we can say, chaplaincy refers inclusively to the theory, practices, and approaches to care that chaplains actualize through their work. So chaplaincy training is one aspect, but then as we serve as chaplains, we can say it sort of builds upon itself. It starts to open up. Mantra, we can say that we hear in chaplaincy training, our patients are our teachers. So in this way, the encounters that we have kind of are what will also help us to broaden our service as spiritual caregivers. Now I also will see, like you're having difficulty with the definition of spiritual care. Like even the term chaplaincy, a lot of people are not clear what that is. And I tell people, even my family, I'm a chaplain. Sometimes in a rough way, I say I'm a priest at a hospital, just to make it easy. And then they're like, oh. So that's another thing to clear up. Oh, that must be so sad. You know, it's not just like that, as we'll say. But chaplain, the term itself, also has kind of like a denominational emphasis. It seems like, so. I mean, maybe I think we'll talk about it. When we see Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim patients, and we say you're the chaplain, in the mind it connects it to Christianity, and so a lot of people are saying, no, we don't want to see the chaplain. So that's also a term that has a bit of a pejorative term, or a problematic term. But we use it, it's helpful. Sometimes you call someone a chaplain, cool, and cool. And they also, oh, please come, I want to speak to you. It also has a very positive, respectful cultural emphasis also. Yes, absolutely. And sometimes it opens the door. I experienced personally just from some periods of time of working outside of the designation of chaplaincy, yet wanting to do a similar type of work for people in hospital settings. It doesn't necessarily carry that same instantaneous identification of, okay, I can speak with this person on the level of the heart. And so the title, as much as, it may be kind of controversial or kind of confusing at times, or an imperfect sort of designation, it does have a certain kind of potency that allows encounters to unfold in a certain way. So a lot of it comes down to, which is another one of our aspirations in doing this talk, in doing this seminar series, is that actually people are very much in need of education about what spiritual care is, about what chaplains do. Because even within, maybe someone does identify with a Christian denomination. We may say, hello, I'm the chaplain, it's good to meet you, and they may immediately say, okay, can you bring me a Bible or something like that? Yes, absolutely, we can, and that is part of what happens. But at the same time, people, we want people to have an understanding that there's a lot that chaplains are able to offer that's outside of, you can say, like liturgical functions only. And also for spiritual care, this isn't just like, say, a seminar about becoming a chaplain. We want to give that information so it's clear and defined. But spiritual care, we believe, is something that's essential for any community, for any healthy community, to be able to interact with each other, to take care of each other. Because the devil is in the details. You may bring someone, you may preach to someone, you may proselytize to someone, they may come. That's just the beginning. We have to take care of them. People have to feel that they're recognized and cared for, just like their family. So spiritual care, I could say as a chaplain, I wish we had more spiritual care. There are more designations for spiritual care. You could have a chaplain, but without chaplain assistants or chaplain navigator or spiritual care navigator, spiritual care assistants, spiritual care coordinators. There's so many other needs
my wife, she was in England, they would do this thing called kirtan on call. So anybody who needed someone to have kirtan, these people maybe, the last, days of their life, it's so hard to find people who could just be there to sing kirtan for them or to read scripture. So it's so useful. And it's not just needed, useful, it's needed. And practical, it's essential. That's why. But it's very essential. And she was an innovator of that program. We want to start it here, but not just kirtan on call, but just to have someone at bedside, even if they're just sick or broke a leg. Hospital is very. I work in hospice and I work in the hospital. And I know my father also, he was a doctor, he passed away in the hospital. But after working in the hospital, I don't think people should pass away in the hospital. They should pass away at home if they can, if they have a choice. If they don't, it's emergency, take care of them. But that's not just about passing. Somebody's depressed, somebody has addiction issues, that's spiritual care. Anybody who's feeling issues of like trauma, that's talking about spiritual care. Okay. Oh, history. That's my brand from that. So history, there's another history. We'll do a history of spiritual care in the Vaishnava community. But this is a general history of spiritual care. So we need to understand that the term spiritual care finds its origins in what's called pastoral care. So again, a terminology. So there's a Christian history associated with pastoral care. Pastoral, it refers to what we think a pastor. It means like a shepherd to a flock. There's a very kind of agrarian concept to the pastor. I hope my terminology is right. I think it is. I'm not just speculating. I'm pretty sure I saw that. So one of the earlier Catholic popes, Pope Gregory, he wrote this literature called Regulae Pastoralis, which is known as pastoral rule. This is the first time the term.
Just when the sirens go off, if you can just hold for a second,
Sure.
So that people online can hear it.
Kind of thing.
It does. It gives quiet ambiance, but might be a little over ambiance.
So pastoral care, it is. I mean, there are certain things that, as we're going through this, I am trying to define. Christianity has a very rich history. I love Christianity. I myself was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school. But there, at some point, will be a need to kind of separate the type of care between two religious communities. Not because we all don't believe in God, but because as I was in another conference recently about grief in the Mahabharata, and I'm sorry, I'm going on tangents, but our Hindu community approaches grief very differently. Like the scholar, the professor was saying how in the Mahabharata there's time constantly, if someone's grieving, one of the warriors say, don't grieve. You shouldn't grieve for this. Don't grieve for things of the body. Don't grieve for them. Stop grieving. It's foolishness. In the Western concept of grief, we say, no, you have to let it go. As long as it takes, as long as you need, you have to go. And so when I go into families' homes who are Hindu, it can be a little bit of a wall. Because, if I say, if you want to speak to somebody about grief, okay, but they may not understand. I'll talk about that a little bit more because I'm going in a bit of a tangent. That will come when we speak about our experiences chaplains. But that to be said, the Christian tradition had a lot to say about pastoral care. This one first comes from the Pope. Of course, there was a division of the Christian church, and that happened during the Protestant Reformation. So our first terminology of pastoral care came from Pope Gregory. I can't remember which number Pope he was. But the Protestant Reformation kind of broke that structure. And so, for example, like we didn't talk about fathers, now we're talking about pastors. So it became, the community became very small. It became more about like a community. It wasn't a big like centralized authority to respond. And so there was more chance for a person to be a pastor or a shepherd to a community. So that was the concept of the priest, quote unquote, from the Protestant Revolution. And Catholicism, for my, like a friend, a Catholic priest, doesn't mean that they're also not shepherds in the community and have that small group. But Christianity has been interacting with its, whether it's Reformed or Protestant or Evangelical, they're all kind of like feeding off each other and they developed, they evolved. So the Protestant Reformation, apart from breaking that structure, made the concept of pastor more reachable. It wasn't just like opposed to bishops and priests. Now, modern time anti-voicing, which would be very fascinating if anybody was ever interested. But there was a series called The Cure of Souls that was a seminar given by my teacher, but he spoke. The whole series was about spiritual care in relation to communities. And one of the main person he spoke of was the founder, the person who contributed to modern pastoral education and modern pastoral care, Anton Wilson. And he has a very interesting story. I don't know if we have time to go into it, but essentially he was a seminary student, comes from a very good family. He had a mental breakdown and he ended up in a psychiatric hospital. And he writes in his own autobiography and how everything seemed like apocalyptic, but he came out of that. He became very clear-minded. Somehow or other, the imminent disaster which he was anticipating, it was over. He realized everything would be fine, but he was still stuck in the psychiatric hospital. So he started to kind of observe his fellow patients and realize that they weren't just going through this magical, mystical madness, that they were all dealing with some kind of, they were dealing with trauma. But he said, essentially, the essential trauma is our spiritual trauma. And because he was a seminary student, he says isolation was the core of all mental illness. That was a theory he had said. Isolation from our community, isolation from our friends, feeling things, we can't express them. It just kind of gets bottled up. That's very much his experience. And maybe these might not be communicated. Maybe it doesn't translate well into the modern chaplaincy or psychology, but that was his theory, isolation. Ultimately, that isolation for him theologically was our isolation from God, our separation. So that isolation from God is the highest existential trauma. Very interesting. Now, I mentioned Richard Clark Cabot because I actually didn't know him. And so when I was preparing this slide, I was like, oh, you should mention him. So Anton Boysen eventually left his psychiatric hospital and became a pastor as he wanted to. And he explained some of the things that he realized not many people listened to him. But Richard Clark Cabot was the head of Mass General in Boston. And he was friends with Boysen. And he's the one who said, you should start clinical pastoral education, which is the standard for all chaplains now. We have to take clinical pastoral education for us to even start in any position as a chaplain. So, and I play SDOH, those are so key. He's well known for saying, as a doctor, it's not just health, it's not just disease and infection. There are SDOH, social determinants of health. Your life status contributes to your welfare. If you're poor, it means you're more vulnerable to certain things. If you, you may be more vulnerable to drug addiction, to other diseases, to less healthy food, to less healthy access to healthy environments. Okay, so that's a brief history and 6 bullet points. history.
Oh, this was,
It's still being written, and it's
this was
really
through
ever changing, ever
one
evolving.
different
It's very real.
presentation.
That's why sometimes to have these conversations can be a really challenging.
Oh, okay.
People
I
have
think
different notions, different ideas,
I left it
different
out.
preferences in terms of how spiritual care is
It's
rendered.
probably put on the
So
album.
it's definitely something that we find that there's a lot of dialogue among spiritual caregivers, and something that can be a very healthy dialogue and very good for community, as Phil was mentioning. You know, big emphasis of what we want to share here is ways in which people within community, you know, all of you can offer spiritual care in some way or another to people in your midst, and that's something that we're trying to encourage, and something that we're trying to serve the community in that way. So yeah, that means that the time may come when we also need to have this dialogue of what spiritual care will look like at the Bhakti Center, what spiritual care will look like within our tradition, within our communities. Kula and I, we have some real, you know, intense conversations. Yes. What's that? But it begins with healthy dialogue. So yeah. Okay, so we'll share in the spirit of trying to understand more about spiritual care. We'll share some very common misconceptions that we find about spiritual care. And these are very, I just want to emphasize how common these are. They come up all the time, virtually all the time. Oh, the test. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So we just want to clear this in the interest of establishing more what spiritual care is and can be. So through kind of clearing some of these misconceptions. So as Kula shared, the history of spiritual care, formerly, you know, most commonly referred to as pastoral care, has a very strong Christian, you know, or origin. It's rooted in Christian tradition. And so we can say even still, a lot of modern day spiritual care, the language that is used, even aspects of the spiritual care education is rooted in Christianity. So it's not, we just want to emphasize that it is not an exclusively Christian discipline.
Yes, yes. Can you close it?
Yes. Oh. Yeah, so it is not an exclusively Christian discipline. Now we have spiritual caregivers, chaplains, who are coming from all different spiritual traditions. We still find, I would say, most commonly chaplains are coming from Christian backgrounds, but at the same time, you know, I've worked with, you know, chaplains of Jewish extraction. I personally was born in the Jewish tradition. Then we have imams who serve as chaplains who have pastoral care training specifically. They're not just in there as clerics, they're in there as chaplains. We have Buddhist chaplains. We have humanist chaplains even who may not, you know, connect with a particular theistic tradition, but they still want to serve in this way on the platform of spiritual care, getting to deeper matters of the heart with people. So that is something that does exist also, and you know, we find that welcome. Yeah. So we now have you know, chaplaincy that is existing across all different spiritual traditions, and it's very important to spread awareness of this fact, because as we said, a lot of people will refuse spiritual care services because they'll say, no, that's not me, that's not my tradition, that's not my faith, and as much as they may deeply want to have these types of interactions and receive this type of care, or just to share. So that's why education is really paramount, so that people can understand what we're here for as spiritual caregivers, and that there really is a much more broad approach. Bless you. So, okay, next misconception about spiritual care. So, quite often there's an understanding that chaplains or spiritual caregivers are preachers or teachers, that they'll enter a hospital room and open a religious text and just start kind of letting someone, you know, have it, or you know, teaching a lesson. So even in a more kind of caring mood, but still like, you know, kind of dropping lots of knowledge and saying, oh, well, you're struggling in this way, so you know, you need to remember that blah 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 blah. You know, kind of going into this more like lecture format, and that is furthest thing from the truth. As far as, you know, we are trained, as far as spiritual care is really, you know, intended to be, we find that it has so much more to do with, as we mentioned, listening, presence,
spending time with someone in a caring way and really hearing from them. So chaplains are encouraged, even if they, in other areas of spiritual life or community, do serve as teachers or preachers or et cetera. As chaplains, we do not wear those hats, and as spiritual caregivers, it's considered detrimental to really come in with that kind of an approach, because just imagine, how much we could be going through, and then someone just comes and talks at you. It's really detrimental. So we just want to emphasize that that is not the position of spiritual caregivers. And we are trained in our chaplaincy training with this virtue, this theory of, it's not even theory, it's really more of a practice of cultural and spiritual humility, that we recognize different backgrounds that people are coming from. And we try to be, educated about that, but even if we are educated, we don't claim to be authorities on that. We can actually learn from hearing from people. It's okay if we don't know everything. We can hear in the course of a conversation, learn more about what is most significant to people, what sort of spiritual backgrounds they have, what sort of spiritual principles are important to them. That can happen through conversation, just as if, I was speaking with a friend. We can have these moments of learning about each other. So in that way, spiritual caregivers are not meant to come in and kind of be know-it-alls, or to be sharing in a one-sided way. So we really want to accompany people according to their own unique backgrounds, beliefs, and needs. So chaplains, we do, and we'll get into this in theory, we do have our own identities, of course. We have our own theology, we have our own outlook. We may, in the course of an encounter, even have certain feelings that come up about something. We may have an opinion or a kind of read on a situation. Yet at the same time, the most important point is that we are there to accompany others, and that it's about, we can say in a very broad sense, that it's focused upon the people who we serve. It's not so much about our stuff. There's an acknowledgement that we bring our uniqueness into a situation, but at the same time, we practice patient-centered care, which is what it sounds like. That when we walk into a room, it's about that person. So that's the second misconception. And who was going to share with us another very prominent misconception?
Oh, yeah, what was it? Yeah, I wrote this, but it's such a lot to read. So basically, there's always a misconception that you come in. For example, and this isn't necessarily just chaplains, but I remember as an example, when I first started my chaplaincy training at the hospital, I was shadowing a Catholic priest, and we walked into a room together, and the patient and the family just was like, no, don't come in, please don't come in, but then when they see a priest, they assume that this means bad news is coming. And the truth is, in many ways, maybe because they need to find a better system, that any time in the hospital, when in the ED, that we had to give news to a family, they said the surgeon who was there with the patient who has to give the bad news, the surgeon and the chaplain have to go to meet the family. The surgeon says, I tried everything, and then he says, this is chaplain so-and-so. I'm sorry, and then he leaves. He leaves. And so, again, this presence means the idea that the chaplains only deal with spiritual grief or bereavement, and that spiritual care is only about grief or bereavement. It's not the case. There are a lot of things that we may take that we do. Actually, I can say that more than 50% of our work wasn't with patients, it was with staff. It's day-to-day stress, day-to-day trauma, day-to-day seeing people being work hours they can't handle, being the only person that can actually do the job and being understaffed. Or, even just to say, okay, we're gonna have a meditation, sit down and have a meditation, close the door. I had a few nurses come and say, can we just do meditations? So spiritual care as a chaplain it's in death, grief, and bereavement is some of the heaviest work we do. And even for us, I mean, I can tell you, I'm traumatized by some of the work that I've had to do in my life. But it's day to day. I mean, so we work in these arenas, colleges, military, prisons, mental health. While they could be like, well, I mean, obviously college isn't such it's a party place, you know. So, but again, that's also a different role. Like college chaplains, like our good friend Bhakti, Vinitu, and I'll say there's 2 books on chaplaincy. He's actually the author, somehow involved in both of them. But he's a very good chaplain. He's the chaplain of Princeton University, the Hindu chaplain of Princeton University. So he maintains like these cultural things like Diwali, but he also, if any students are having any stress or feeling that they need to speak to someone, he's there. He has that, you know, essential clinical pastoral education. And so, but you know, Dina works in a mental health facility, so he deals with people. There's no imminent death. There's no, but there could be grief.
It happens,
Yes.
but it's not an everyday occurrence. You know, it does come up, and or people may lose family members, and because of their status of having to remain as an inpatient in the hospital, they may not be able to see them. They may not be able to even go to the funeral. We try to advocate for these things, but depending on that person's condition at that time, they may not be approved to go. So you can imagine in those situations, spiritual care is very, very much needed. And so, yeah, so we'll speak more about that.
And just, you know, conclusion, I mean, apart from death, grief, and bereavement, yes, we do deal with these things, but a big role is celebratory, whether I'm having, you know, Diwali or holy celebration at the hospital, or even if it's, you know, someone's like, we say prayers and we do with meetings and things like that, or depending if it's a more secular or reflection, meditation, and then resilience building is a very big factor of spiritual care. That's something a guide to both of us. She does a lot of resilience, leads a lot of resilience groups, which means that, you know, building up the day-to-day type of care, the small traumas that accumulate. You know, I don't know, for me, I don't know how small traumas. I saw a recent discussion about trauma, and where the person said maybe we use that term a lot for a lot of things, and we should be very clear about what we really want to reserve for the term trauma. But let's just say in terms of resilience, it's day to day. Even someone like Buddha in a very existential way says almost every moment is suffering for us. Like life is difficult. It is, I mean, not in a pessimistic way. It's just a struggle. Life carries with it that struggle. And then of course trauma, we deal with trauma. So yes, I mean we deal with a lot of difficult things, but we also deal with a lot of very positive, hopeful things as chaplains and in spiritual care. Because again, I don't want to say this is excluded. Spiritual care, which we'll go into after this class, is for everybody. No way aspects that are applicable to everybody. Chaplaincy is also available to anybody if they want to. It's a bit more of a field of chaplaincy.
I just wanted to briefly add that, you know, the scope of spiritual care goes way beyond death, grief, bereavement. But I also wanted to just mention that grief, we also sometimes associate only and only with death, with the end of life. And there are so many different varieties of grief that we see, and that we try to serve people when they're experiencing different types of grief. So just to give a few examples, you know, perhaps somebody has lost contact with a family member, or they've been shut out by a family member, something like that. That is a very, very deep kind of grief, because it's an experience of loss, though it may not directly correlate with death. Another would be actually feeling that someone's lost a part of themselves. We encounter that a lot in mental health settings, when people feel that it's been so long since they've been able to be, you know, fully integrated into the community, when they forget what it's like to go shopping at the grocery store, and maybe they see on TV self-checkout or something like that, and they have no idea how they would approach that. They feel alienated from their experience. They feel alienated from a previous version of themselves, who was confident and competent and an active member of society. So that's a really deep kind of grief that people can carry with them. And just
to speak to, a type of grief that we see, it's very unique, but it's very real in a psychiatric or behavioral health setting, that people sometimes have beliefs that may not be reality based. In psychiatric terms, it'd be called delusional belief. It's a little harsh of a term, but what we can say is that they are real to those people who you're working with. So someone may have some very strongly founded belief that they are going to be murdered or something like that. I'm just speaking honestly from experience, that someone will have a belief that the minute I leave the hospital, the CIA is going to get me or something like that. And it's a very real thing, and it's completely reality for that person in that moment of time. So it requires the same level of care, the same level of seriousness. Not that we endorse that belief or somehow try to affirm it, but at the same time to tend to those emotions in the very same way, because in that moment that person is experiencing serious grief and crisis. Okay. Oh, yeah, good. So we're gonna share now in a sort of open-ended way about just some of our personal experiences in spiritual care, in the hope that they can be of use to everybody in terms of different ways of applying spiritual care and what the training is like. If anyone here felt inclined in that way in the future.
Yeah, okay. It's not just about chaplaincy, it's more about like our spiritual care experience and I guess I didn't prepare anything. I was thinking about it earlier. So going back to what I was saying earlier, that's when I realized maybe I could speak about it. So I'm a pujari, like in the temple upstairs. So I do regular service here at the temple. And I also do sacraments, samskaras. And so there are times I've done like Shraddha, which is it's not beautiful, it's not last rites, but 13 days after someone passes, you do a Shraddha, which is to welcome them into the afterlife, to the land of their forefathers. But after that is purgation, that's when the body is usually cremated. I was doing these rituals and I've done them, and I felt doing the ritual and then I felt leave. And I felt there has to be something more to that. And that's why I went into chaplaincy, into spiritual care training, clinical pastoral. So I thought that I could give grief support or bereavement also. And I realized with all of the sacraments I could do, we can't just, that maybe I can't just do the ritual, that I can do more support. And maybe that's the role of the priest, is to do more than just say, I did this right, good luck. You're married, good luck, figure it out. So, well, two things. So that brings me back to that conversation I had about the Mahabharata. And so this scholar was saying that, generally, even in the Gita, Arjuna is breaking down and crying, drops his bow. What does Krishna say? Why is this dirt come upon? Why did these things? You're a Arya. You're from, you're a highborn person. You know that this body is. So here's your friend breaking down, crying. I don't want to do this. He's like, what's wrong with you? What are you doing? Stop crying. And so in the Mahabharata, there's a lot of instances like that. And so I asked the person, I reflected after that lecture, I said, apart from that, don't get me wrong, there are parts of the scripture where there is grief. There's poetry that expresses grief, expresses sorrow. So I'm not saying it's exclusively that. But culture, and that's not just Hindu culture or Indian culture, American kind of even masculine culture, we cannot be allowed to grieve, cry, be weak. And so just focusing on the Hindu culture, I said, well, one, I had to reflect on that realization I had first that led me to CPE, that led me to be a chaplain, that maybe there's not one type of grief, and that maybe someone's way to address that grief is through the ritual. And so there is a concept called a therapeutic ritual. And if you do Shraddha, you would know like you're basically welcoming of course, the ancestors, the relatives who's passed, and you're offering them seed, you're offering them food, you're offering them flowers, garlands, you're welcoming. And I remember in one person who wanted to show that, I said, just meditate and think that they're there, tell them thank you. You know, the mantras are there to meditate as you're giving that thanks, that you're telling them how much you love them. They broke down the crack. So the ritual isn't just a ritual. They also have stigmas of ritual, and grief isn't just one type of grief. People can express grief in a myriad of different ways. So, as you were saying, there's many ways that small, large, crying, you know, or if you want to go through a ritual, that was another way. So I think there are personal experiences, but I think mainly, I just jumped to this last point. I keep on anybody who asks me, I say this type of work, spiritual care work, has been the most significant theological experience I've had since, well, becoming a devotee person, since I became and I was a teenager. So, because many ways, yes, there's memento mori, there's death, you see it, it's a very realistic thing, but you also see how people deal with that. You see people who say, I have gone to your church every day and you took my kid away from me. Why? I've been there with the head chaplain, like, I'm gonna pray for you. They just hit him away, say, what prayer are you gonna do? I've been to church every day. I don't serve this. Those are questions. Those are questions that really, you're sitting there. I thought I was a theologian. This guy who's crying about his kid, that's a theology. I mean, that's like, I pray every day. I don't deserve this. And not only do I, my kid doesn't deserve this. These are babies and children, they do nothing. So it is like, you see those deep theological questions, those existential issues in front of your face. They're undeniable. It's not theoretical. We learn it. We go to a Bhakti Sastri, we theorize it. It's happening. It happens in front of me. But apart from that, one other thing that's been the theological impact is I've worked with Catholic priests and imams, and we're friends. We sit down and break bread together. There's this area of like theology where we all agree, where we're helping each other. We want to help this person out to find God. And we're not saying it's Allah, we're not saying it's Jesus. One of my colleagues is a Baptist. She's an older Baptist woman. She's just a lay person. And she said, well, what's your religion? I was like, well, I'm Hindu. And she's like, well, do you believe in Jesus? I said, yeah, I believe in Jesus. And then she said, well, you believe in Jesus, you think he's God? I was like, yeah, he's the son of God, right? She's like, well, then you're a Christian to me. And it doesn't mean that she was like, that doesn't mean like I got converted and I was saved and I got baptized. But it was her way of saying like, you're with me and I'm with you. And there's a lot of this area where we all meet, like with these general theologies about love, God is love, God is compassion, that we're all souls, and then we all go home and we're in love with God, we're in love with Jesus. She's in love with Jesus. The Imam is deeply devout to Allah, and I come and I serve Krishna. And that's our personal paths. But here in chaplaincy, in spiritual care, we all meet, we break bread. It's not a seminar. It's not like a seminar where we all met and we compare our theologies. You believe in this, you believe in that. No, we work. We break bread together. We run to the ED together. Yeah. We work together, and we thank each other. It's beautiful. That's a big theological experience.
Mm-hmm.
So beautifully said. Just wanted to echo that. Yeah, when there are these kind of denominational differences or different spiritual traditions in the realm of spiritual care, they are reconciled in so many ways. If only, I think there is a lot of good dialogue that takes place, but even just the intensity of the work, the intensity of the service, everyone's trying to offer, really, immediate care to people who are having some of the most difficult experiences of their entire lives. So in that way, as Kula said, running to the ER, whatever it is,
we come out of an encounter like that, and it's not, you're a Muslim and I'm a Hindu or anything like that. We're really trying to serve God and to serve God's parts and parcels, God's children. And we feel that together, and that is a very beautiful thing. And theologically, it is profound because it cuts through even our own identifications. We bring our theology with us, but at the same time, there's this very visceral, very real experience of just trying to serve in this way. You feel God's presence in those rooms, and you pray that the people you're with feel God's presence in the room when you leave. And also, it's just a question of, sometimes the service is so intense and so just, what can we say? Really difficult, painful, tragic, that you find yourself praying in free moments, silently, secretly, you're praying. So in that way also, you're having this experience with God when you're calling upon, God for assistance or guidance in the way that you're trying to help and serve. So just to share, so I can share the way that I initially got involved with chaplaincy. So I was a student of comparative religion, in college. So that was always just a big fascinating topic for me, the way that different people carry their beliefs with them, the way that they live those beliefs out. And I didn't grow up in a very kind of religious background, and I think family and friends were always surprised, like, wow, you're so interested in religion, you're so fascinated with religion. But for me, in many ways, it really just spoke to what is most, as we define spirituality, what is most meaningful, what is most significant to people, how they are viewing the world. And I wanted to learn more and more about that. And as time went on, it just became clear that there has to be some way to offer this and put this into practice and to work with people of all different spiritual backgrounds. And chaplaincy was always kind of in the back of my mind. I worked as a taxi driver for a while, and that was surprisingly similar to being a chaplain, honestly. It was really, really profound experience. I was here in the Bhakti Center in the ashram, like my monastery period. And then when I left, the first job I took was that taxi driver job. And, what's different, right? Of course it's different, but you have people get into the car who you never met before, who you will most likely never see again. They're in a position of anonymity, and they can share with you, and often they do share with you. And so that kind of piqued my interest. And then I had an experience just where I was uncertain about the really difficult parts of it, being with people at the end of life, being with people who are in deep crisis. And I had one spiritual mentor of mine in Ohio, who I was very close with. We were very good friends, but he also was a deep teacher and mentor for me. And he very, very suddenly passed away. And I had the blessing and the opportunity to be with him for the last 10 days of his life in the hospital. And I'm so grateful for that blessing. It was hard, but it was so beautiful. And I almost feel in a certain way as a gift from him. It alleviated some of those feelings I had about, can I serve people in that way? Can I be in this kind of atmosphere? So that kind of opened things up. And, personal loss does teach us, because when we're trying to be with people in the context of loss, not that we compare in any way, but at the same time, loss in many ways does form us as caregivers. We have this, sometimes we hear of what's called a wounded healer. It's one who, due to their own wounds, they actually have more ability to have empathy, to connect. Again, without comparison, but to have those experiences. So for me, when I finished my first unit of chaplaincy training, on the same day that I graduated the chaplaincy training, I went to a funeral for another friend of mine. It's kind of like, wow, there's an affirmation there in a certain way of, this is not going to stop anytime soon. This is the nature of life in this world. So we wish to serve people on that platform. And so then, so that was in a general hospital setting, a lot of ICU, end of life. And then I did a residency at a hospital here in Brooklyn, and that was one of the most intense experiences, definitely, of my life. Just entering into all different types of situations, overnights, waking up in the middle of the night, and then having to kind of rub your eyes and stumble into very, very painful, challenging situations.
Bringing back trauma.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, we can't hear the sound of a beeper, we hear the sound of a pager or a beeper, it's like. Because, but I'm grateful for it because what it does is it really primes you to be able to enter into any kind of situation and say a prayer and try to do your best, to be with people. And so, and it was in that residency that I first had a little opportunity to work in a psychiatric unit, behavioral health unit in the hospital. And I found that so deep because a lot of the time in medical chaplaincy, we have what's called the initial concern, which is my arm hurts, my arm is hurting me so bad, but whatever it is, right? Medical issue. And someone can spend a very, very long time talking about that, and that's all right. But then in spiritual care, we do want to also penetrate to other layers of that person's existence, other layers of that person's experience. And what I found in the behavioral health chaplaincy is that a lot of the time the initial concern evaporates very, very quickly. And you enter into these deep dialogues that, because of the people's openness, because of their willingness to just engage. And I found that really profound. So anyway, that's how I ended up becoming attracted to working in behavioral health setting. And it's very intense, I mean, no doubt about it. But it's beautiful. And one distinction is that where I work, it's kind of like the end of the line. Psychiatrically, you can say, at least I'm in the state of New Jersey, so people will get hospitalized for a short period of time in a different, community hospital, and if they're not really stabilizing or getting better, you can say, they end up being sent to a more long-term facility, which is where I work. And so it's a different kind of relationship, it's a different kind of spiritual care relationship. It's less triage and crisis, though crises are there. It's more of kind of long-term relationships that you cultivate. It's more of a day-to-day support and relationship. So yeah, I can just share about that, and then SCP training, hospital experiences. Yeah, I think we've covered more or less everything, and then just the theological impact again. To have a service that calls upon us to pray, to have a service that calls upon us to learn from others, to see what is most meaningful, to be connected in this very sometimes very scary and very challenging way, but to come out of it feeling how deeply God's presence is there. That's one of the main theological impacts that I've felt in this kind of work, that you can't not feel that presence. Of course, biblically it says when two or more are gathered, right? Yeah. So of course, we know this to be a spiritual truth, but at the same time, that reality becomes all the more clear when we're engaging on this level of depth and accompanying people in this way. So yeah, I feel grateful for those experiences. And that's something that actually everyone here, you find, have you ever noticed when you're talking to someone and there's like a moment when they realize that you're listening? Have you ever had this experience like that? In our society, we don't listen very much. So sometimes it can be in the store, the grocery store, the cashier, what have you. If you actually give someone dedicated presence and they see that you're listening, it's just incredible the way that the interactions can open up. Yeah, you've had that experience. Earlier today. Yeah. They like almost do a double take. They're like, okay, this person's actually listening. I'm gonna share now. So this is something that we encourage just across the board because it's such a profound experience and a way to serve. Okay. So I'm not sure that's okay. Yes.
So basically, we spoke a lot about chaplaincy, what we do, what chaplaincy. So this kind of part, this is kind of towards the end. We're going to go through aspects of spiritual care, which I think these are the things we're talking about that are applicable. But these are things that we could take, things that we could utilize. Like we're what is it? Who's listening?
Oh, it's coming. It's a couple more slides.
One trained me to like active listening, reflective listening. It's like you have no idea how powerful this tool is. I can, he says, I can change the entire mood of the room just using this skill. I was like, oh, he's like, it's Jedi, he said it's a Jedi mind trick. Perhaps he was evil. No, he's a pastor, but he was actually a very good part of the person, but he noted like power of listening, as Dean was saying, but at this point, I think these are the things that, apart from maybe learning what it means to be spiritual care provider, or have a sense of that. Because again, like, we're not just giving you like a vocational area, this isn't like a trade fair, we're trying to tell you what you need to do, these are the documents you need to get here on Friday. We're just telling you how it is to be a spiritual care provider, what we do, what you can do, what you will do, what we need, we wish more people could do. So these are some of the things that we constantly run into. These are the things that we were trained in CPT. And again, they're not just for chaplains, they're not just for pastoral care, they're for a lot of people to utilize. And also realize, as you were saying, sometimes if you're a good listener, you're gonna have to learn also how to, because it's not like I'm just listening at work and go home, I gotta listen. I gotta listen to my family, you have to balance that. Care has to be balanced, you have to draw lines, and know, and try to find a balance. So, we're starting with this.
These are points actually that we can kind of just briefly touch upon, because the ones that we're going to focus on more.
And more.
And listening.
So this is just a review of the topics in general. In the next class, I think, or in the next seminar.
The next seminar, we're definitely going to have more practice. We're going to do more kind of actually putting these methods into practice for those who are interested. We'll do role playing. We'll actually really enact these
Case
studies, and so on and so forth, which is really it's very good. That's where the rubber meets the road, and it feels very affirming to have these like in Sanskrit we'll say moving from jnana to vijnana, moving from knowledge to realization, because when we put these things into practice, they become very tangible and real. So these are just a few theoretical aspects of spiritual care that often come up in spiritual care training. Thank you so much. Yeah. So we talk about, we'll just touch upon these briefly because we have other ones that are kind of more, you can say, pillars of spiritual care. But we talk about transference and counter-transference. So transference is when the person who we're offering spiritual care to, they see us in a particular way according to their own experience. Counter-transference would be the opposite, the way that we see somebody. So I could be offering care to someone, and whether consciously or subconsciously, oh, this reminds me of my sister who I haven't spoken with in a long time, something like that.
And then you start treating them that way, without knowing. And then, for example, even as a chaplain, you might say that, oh, you might be my sister, and it's my sister, and then that counter transference you kind of fulfilling that role, and also, or even something different. You remind me of my friend, or whatever, it's counter transference. So the observer and the observed, transference and counter transference.
Yeah, we have to be very careful and cautious about that, because sometimes we're kind of making things happen for ourselves in the hospital room. Oh, I miss my friend, and this guy reminds me just so much of him. So I'm going to have a really chummy, loving experience with them, and I'm going to leave feeling great because it reminds me of my buddy who I have, right? So there's that. Of course, we want to be loving and caring in the spiritual care context, but we want it to be for that person, not for us, right? And counter-transference, so that's our counter-transference, but transference we also need to be aware of. If we find that someone is, at the end of our encounter or something like that, telling us that they love us, something like that. I mean, there may be a time and place for that, but at the same time, from a clinical perspective, and even offering spiritual care in the community, we want to be aware of these things, just as a heightened sensitivity, and looking within ourselves about what is this bringing up for me. So next would be the necessity of exploring our own identities and experiences. The more we can be aware of ourselves, where we come from, what our journey has been, then we can also kind of just have an honest self-understanding and be able to use those things constructively in our spiritual care, or as necessary, kind of get them out of the way. So a lot of spiritual care training, we may think is only turned outward toward helping other people, but a lot of spiritual care training does involve this sort of internal work, internal exploration, because that makes us, you can say, hopefully, kind of sharpens us as tools, in the way that we wish to serve. Yeah, I mean, so, and also identity is something that comes up a lot in spiritual care. So people tend to project any kind of clergy figure, for sure, that they've known in their life, they'll kind of project onto, certainly in a clinical setting, chaplain. And it can be good, or it can be very, very negative experiences that people have had. We've definitely been also called every title under the sun, father, rabbi. Yes, I'm a chaplain, I'm a chaplain. Yeah. Father. Yeah. I guess that's the point of it. Yeah, okay, so adapting to different needs, culture, humility, we discussed.
Actually, I do want to say a few things.
Please.
For identity and cultural humility, when we did our education, cultural humility, cultural sensitivity, cultural awareness. That was our first kind of unit of CPE. And many, I have a lot of colleagues who went, like colleagues from the temple who were just like, I dropped out. It just seemed like this very liberal thing about cultural humility. And I was like, okay, but it is necessary in any multi-faith, multicultural circumstance, not to just be aware of different cultures, but to be humble enough not to say like, oh, you're Gujarati, I know what you like to eat. And things like that are like, I know what you need. That's the humility of it, to say that I don't know what you need. And to even to assume you know what you need. And why I think some people have that kind of problem is, and I mentioned this to my supervisor, I was like, I feel challenged in terms of this identity and this cultural humility. I feel like you're breaking down my identity. And I said that bothers me. Because what I thought being a priest wasn't that anymore. So I had to kind of, he said, that's great, that's happening. Because in these later units, you're going to have to rebuild that. And I said this before, I said, I used to think that I was going to the hospital to bring the temple to the hospital. But later I found myself bringing a hospital to the temple. And that's not because I'm bringing a secular world, I'm bringing this care that was taught, but they didn't rob me of my identity. They reconstructed and said, well, because I'm not just a ritualist. I do care about community. I want to do more than just like swaha or, a blessing, throw a flower in your face or something. Okay, there has to be one. So these are very important things, exploring our identities and understanding culture, other cultures, things that we thought we were in opposition to. Well, I'm not Christian because this, they're like that. That's gone. I don't have those biases, or this is what, my values or whatever. It's there. I mean, obviously we understand our role. We're very clear, we are not this or that. But we also have respect. We also it brings a really clear self idea of who you are. Yeah.
I just wanted to briefly mention on the topic of cultural humility that as we're kind of aspiring to offer spiritual care within our spiritual community, cultural humility is really essential here too, because we have a shared culture, right? If we're all coming, to this temple and everything, we have our Christian culture, we have our shared culture, and that's a very beautiful thing. It's a very real thing. But at the same time, we want to have that culture of humility in terms of recognizing the other aspects that are diverse within our community.
Yeah,
people of different backgrounds, different upbringings, socioeconomic, different cultural backgrounds, people who even are at different levels of the extent to which they feel convinced of the tradition, the extent to which they are actively or inactively practicing, the extent to which people want to be involved in an institutional community. So all of these things are important aspects to consider, even as we're entering into this aspiration to kind of offer spiritual care
within our community. It may be easy to say, oh, it's our spiritual community, so, you know, it's across the board, but no, we need to be personalists, we need to be recognizing the different qualities of individuals. Okay,
You know, actually, time.
yeah, it's about 15 or 20.
23. 423.
I thought they would be done before.
Let's jump ahead to our key, let's jump ahead to our key points. I'll just, one sentence explain something. Motivation for ministry is looking into why is it that I want to offer care in this way. Again, Christian terminology, yeah, but this is something we're called upon to look at as spiritual caregivers.
This one is very important. I find this very important. Hospice care, it's huge. Storytelling, like, it's a big thing. You know, always check, make sure there's a review of life and things like that. Everyone's having perspective about life.
Yep. Emphasis upon presence and listening to be discussed. We're going to be getting to that. And finally, the need for curiosity and authentic response. In other words, we don't want to be overly artificially like Zen as spiritual caregivers. When we go in and talk to people, they say something that is shocking, if they say something that is tragic, if they say something that is alarming, you show your honest emotions and reaction. Because a lot of the time, people will actually feel belittled if you're just trying to be so neutral and flat with them and so calm and cool. Because actually, they may feel that, okay, this person isn't listening. What I have said, is it even landing? So actually, we want to tap into a way to express our honest emotions, our honest reactions to what we're hearing. Of course, you know, in a way that doesn't derail the whole conversation or anything like that. But it's okay if someone says something, you can say, oh my God, that's terrible. You know, and just for example, like something that you feel, because actually that's going to allow the dialogue to go deeper, because we're connecting as human beings. And a lot of the time we connect more deeply in terms of our struggles and challenges than we may connect in terms of all of the rosy things. So instead of shifting the dialogue, you know, someone's telling us something difficult, instead of trying to shift the dialogue and find comfy, common ground, we want to actually allow those emotions to come out, because sometimes if we emote, we're also giving that person permission to express their own emotional side about what's going on. So and finally, yeah, curiosity. We want to be curious. As we said in the beginning, we don't want to be know-it-alls. We don't want to claim to have, you know, too much knowledge. We want to be very curious, ask questions, ask clarifying questions, allow the dialogue to open up in an honest, deep way. And you know, I just can remember so many times people appreciate it so much if you take interest in something. Again, it may even come down to their illness. It may come down to their illness, and if you can name their illness and ask them about it, what it's like. Of course, you know, people are not just their illness. We want to go deeper than that. But sometimes they hear from doctors only about the illness. Sometimes they may hear from another discipline about everything else, but not acknowledge the elephant in the room, why they're there. So in this way, if we can view the person as a complete individual, including what their current circumstances, and having that curiosity, it's very conducive, you know, to dialogue.
Just that one last thing, even though it says important, storytelling, like review in hospice, it's actually always, it's not just in hospice, I just think, I find it very helpful, but actually it's very helpful all the time. Like, it's huge, it's very huge. Like, I've had, one thing about life reflection, it's, anyway, at the hospital, I saw a lot of it. When you get discharged and you see what changed people. So anyway, it's not just for, you know, end of life, it's life, being able to understand what's going on. Okay.
So now we'll enter into some key principles of spiritual care that all of you can practice, and we will, in our next session, enter more deeply into the actual application of these things, but hopefully this explanation will be helpful. So who was going to share about presence?
This I will read. Okay, so presence, though, presence is very, I talked about this before and maybe later, I don't know if I should do, we'll go into presence again. I mean, in future session.
Oh, yeah.
We're going more deeper into the concept of presence. It's a foundational concept of spiritual care. Again, yes, the terminology really came from Christianity. The term they used is the ministry of presence. only to indicate its value, that this is almost like this is a sacred thing. And I think, but I'll say it now and you don't repeat it. So I think when the other seminar I gave, I said, well, what did I say? I said, well, what we have the system now where you like the most, if somebody has something important to say, the first thing, of course, is face to face. Like, and many times we avoid face to face. We're like, well, I'll just text them, or why don't we just give them a call? That's the second level. We call them. The third level is you text them. The fourth level is an email, because you're like, who's gonna read them? If they read it, they read it. And then, but all of those different levels, I would say which one is more present? And you can say, well, obviously face-to-face is more present than say emails, but that's not necessarily true. The defining factor is presence in all of those types of communication. Because if you're very present in an email, if you're saying a lot of things that you want to say, you're very present. And at least in that case, I kind of went straight to the point that one of the core aspects of presence is actually love. Jump to that. I'm not going to say that, it's not said here. The definition of mystery presence is a favorite phrase of Twitter. Whether describes how to work with or without words. I mean, imagine yourself, you're a chaplain, you're in that place, someone just lost their loved one, they're crying. What words are you going to offer? Like, their youngest child, there are no words. That's the reality. That's this. What can you say to somebody? You're there. Do you need water? I mean, sometimes it seems like I give you something to drink. You haven't eaten, let me find something for you. It's not something about trying to give something to fix this. And that's something we teach us about chaplains. It's like, I remember someone was crying and I wanted to touch them. I was going to pat them. And then he's a senior chaplain. And I said, why did you do that? He said, you can't, don't. Why did you do that? Did you want to comfort him for you? Did you want to comfort him? Did you want to comfort for yourself? Because you felt uncomfortable. I thought he was being a little cold. I was like, come on, you just got to do the guy, give him a hug. But the point was right. Sometimes we say something to stop the situation. Like, stop. Oh, hey, it's not so bad. Hey,
The tissues.
yeah,
Tissues.
yeah, okay.
What are you saying? I get someone and tissues. Stop crying. You know, it can be. Again, it's about presence. You can lovingly, for sure, you can lovingly give someone tissues. You can lovingly pat someone on the back. But at the same time, we have to be sensitive to what effect.
What's that community? What is the context of that communication? So presence, like I said, we have these different tiers. It's not really like I text you and I know I'm not present. And I'm not saying if you're in a relationship with somebody, you're just like, I'm just going to text them from now on. But you do have to think about the real question is what is present. Presence, if you really look at it, it's very powerful. I can tell you, I mean, how many times I'm talking, even to Tina, John, life, sometimes I'm not present. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe presence, huge thing. Like we all know. Are you there? Hello? You know, just tap. You know, are you there? Presence is in terms of the ministry. Let's use their term. We could look into other terms of like existence or chit or something. We will examine these concepts from a Lodian perspective, from our tradition. But this presence is sacred. It's the core of it. It's the core of all communication. It's a very important thing. So as a chaplain, that's the thing we focus when we're with the patient. When it's patient-centered, we're present. Every chaplain is any tradition. I don't know what else is. Oh no, let me just read it. It's a quote. Ministry presence is a favorite phrase of chaplains describe how they work with or without words to be the vehicle of God's love when they enter a room with a dying patient. The cell of a prisoner, the cubicle of an employee, or the foxhole of a frightened soldier. Francis Assisi expressed well when he said, preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words. So this is brought from director of chaplaincy, characters of Reformed Church. So there's another slide of this. Yeah, so there's two forms of presence. Here, you're either gonna have presence with individuals, one to another, or others, and then there's presence of one person with God or divinity. And so that, again, that can be sometimes the role of the chaplain teams to facilitate that, whether it's with themselves, using themselves, or allowing that to happen in the individuals, for the patient. Yeah, so we provide themselves, we provide ourselves, we advocate, we point out, we nourish this connection and presence. Whether it's with others, whether it's two people, whether it's me, or whether it's as I was implying with Penton Boys, and you said the ultimate isolation with God, ultimate source of our pain is our separation from God, which maybe another time we'll talk about examples.
So as an extension of presence, we'll speak about listening. Listening is very, very fundamental to spiritual care, and we'll speak about primarily two different varieties of listening. So one is known as active listening, the other is reflective listening, and they nourish each other. You can say they're closely related, but there is a distinction. So listening is an essential pillar of any spiritual care encounter. Right? So we're talking about how as spiritual caregivers, it's not, as we said at the beginning, it's not very much about speaking. We can, and it does happen where we'll be able to offer some words, more to help give voice to what a person is going through. But that has to be done sensitively. So much of what we're doing is just remaining open, listening, and really being present. So this actually, anyway, sometimes speech, as we said here, sometimes speech can affirm our listening. So repeating things back, so on. We'll get into that. So the term active listening underlines the fact that effective listening is far from a passive process. This active process demands that we first grasp what the person means and then communicate this to them. That's coming from healthcarechaplaincy.org. So active listening, it's not something where we're just sitting there and letting the words kind of bathe us and drift through our minds. We really have to bring it back again and again. Am I listening? Am I with this person? Am I active? And in that way, we have ways of kind of entering back into the conversation again and again, affirming our presence, and also in a way that person can feel it, because that makes a huge difference in terms of that person actually seeing, as we talked about before, the cashier at the grocery store. This person's actually listening. This person's actually with you. So we're going to discuss some practical ways in which we can drive that home, where people can really feel that they're being heard, and this really nourishes the dialogue in so many ways and nourishes their sharing. And also, there's a theological point here that if someone feels seen and heard, they may very well feel more seen and heard by the divine. Especially, we do our part as spiritual caregivers, we have our exchange with someone, and then we leave. So if they can leave that encounter feeling seen and heard, that's going to extend out to other areas of their life. And they're going to carry that feeling of being seen and heard quite likely into their spiritual life as well. So this communication of what we have heard in the process of active listening is known as reflective listening. So just important elements of active listening include nonverbal communication, so body language, facial expression, eye contact. If Kul is talking to me, telling me something really significant in his life, and I'm like, yeah, it's interesting. What did it say? Sorry, can you repeat that? Yeah, right. So in this way, and nothing is worse. Nothing is worse than this. Really. I mean, and people are so keyed into this too. If you even pull it out, and even actually the clock itself, even if you have a traditional clock on the wall, you have to be very sensitive about that. And it comes up, in any setting. If someone sees you glancing at the clock, people are polite. They don't want to put anybody out. And it's a risk enough, it's a vulnerable enough position to be sharing about your life with someone. You see them get distracted or check the time in some way, it can end the encounter. It really can, or you have to really give a lot of assurance. No, not at all. I'm here with you. So it's just something to be aware of, right? That was the problem with the chaplains when they go home. So a lot of times that is the way we're trained to not look at the time, but there's some people waiting for us. Yes. So there are ways that you could handle that situation, saying, hey, I just saw you, it's near the end of my shift, and I thought I'd just stop in, certain words, like I would stop in and see how you're doing. Yeah. Things like those are certain words giving an indication of time. Yeah.
Your time is limited.
End of my shift, I got a little bit of time, I wanted to stop in. Stop in and see, right. And sometimes it may even have to do with the choreography of the exchange. Not to say that it's something fake or anything, but I just mean our physical presence there. So, if we're sitting down, leaning in with somebody, the time is going to melt away in a beautiful way. But at the same time, yeah, if you kind of are more like leaning, standing, and you communicate, okay, I don't have a lot of time, without necessarily making the person feel uncomfortable or ignored. Okay. So establishing presence is important. So generally speaking, we do want to offer a full-scale spiritual care presence to someone. You want to be sitting down. You definitely want to be sitting down. Otherwise, you can just kind of communicate. Okay, at any moment, I can go this way, I can go that way. I'm here, I'm there. So we sit down, eye contact, silence. So we want to establish focus. There are certain things that can happen, right? Small cues, just making sounds of acknowledgement. Mm-hmm. Yes, and of course, some people like to do that kind of mechanically, and it loses its effect. But at the same time, in principle, this can be a very, very validating and effective way of showing someone, I'm with you, I'm still listening, I'm following, nodding, facial expressions, as we said, so on. Not interrupting. Sometimes when we're hanging out with friends, when it's a more casual environment, we interrupt people. Oh yeah, that reminds me of blah, 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 like that. We want to be very sensitive in spiritual care encounters, that we are not setting that kind of tone, that we are allowing the person who's sharing to define the parameters of the conversation. If they want to ask us something, that's fine. But at the same time, we don't want to divert them from their sharing, because the sharing is, in many cases, what is most therapeutic for them and most beneficial for them. Asking clarifying questions when truly necessary. That's an exception. Or sometimes by asking questions, we're actually also assuring that person, I want to fully understand what you're sharing right now. So I heard that you said this, but is it correct? Did I get this? Did I get this correct? Like that. So in that way, we're showing someone, I want to fully understand the intricacies of what you're sharing. That's active listening. Reflective listening. Emotional presence and connection. Paraphrasing, right? Summarizing or offering words. Sometimes actually that can be a very effective way of offering spiritual care, just an aspect of spiritual care, when someone sometimes can't find the words. We have to be sensitive. We don't want to jump to conclusions and say something that's unbecoming or doesn't fit what they're going through. But if we spend the time quiet, listening, taking it in, and you can say something like, it sounds like this is a very bewildering situation for you. And sometimes they'll say, yes, yeah, it is bewildering. You're helping them to put words to their experience, because when we're in difficult times, our minds are just reeling. We can't necessarily summarize what's happening for ourselves. So by giving that to somebody, we can actually serve them in their own process of what's going on. Attention to detail is very important, right? That we're not just taking things in some broad, all-encompassing kind of way. That we want to really draw out the details of that person's situation and acknowledge to them that we hear those details. So names, they're talking about a friend, they're talking about a loved one. We want to remember the name, use the name, so that we're not just talking about some one-size-fits-all situation. Another continued affirmation of listening. So again, as we said, nodding, taking things in, I'm with you, I'm listening, and reflecting feelings back to people. So that's another thing. Sometimes when we're in crisis, when we're having difficulty, we actually don't know what we're feeling. We know that we're feeling a lot. We know that we're feeling an intensity, but we may not even be able to take stock of what varieties of feelings we're experiencing. So in that way, by reflecting the feelings, it's giving that person clarity so that they can at least have a grasp of what it is that's happening right now
how they may be able to seek shelter in that situation, how they may be able to just acknowledge honestly what they're going through. Because otherwise it can be really shocking. It's just shocking. So this is the one my instructor says is very powerful. I mean, like if you try it, that's it. Try it, you'll see. And again, some people may like, if somebody says like, I don't know what's going on. I'm so tired. I did this, and this today. I don't have any time to do this. And then you're like, so it sounds like, you sound like you're really tired and you're really busy today. You could really use some rest. Like, yeah. And then I have this response like, yeah, somebody could say like, yeah, that's what I just told you. But some people, when they're just like, yeah, I am, that is how I feel. Because maybe they're not listening to themselves. We don't listen to ourselves. And so when you say it, it's being clear to them what's happening to them. And maybe they can take action like, yeah, I do need to rest. Like, well, how can we help you get someplace to rest? How can I help you get out of this shift so we can get you home? Something like that. They don't know a lot. I don't know what I'm going through. John will just say like, listen and say like, it sounds like you're really busy. You need to get home and sleep. Even though I just said, I'm so busy, I just want to go to sleep. You're really busy, then you should go home and sleep. I'm like, oh.
Yeah. You affirm and validate that person's feelings because we tend to minimize our own feelings. We're very much afraid of kind of taking up space in that way.
Yeah.
We don't want to step on anybody's toes. It's like, yeah, I'm so tired, but it's fine. It's fine, it's good, it's fine.
Life is over. So many things happen, we can't really assess it ourselves.
So if someone else says to you, you seem really tired, you seem really worn out, it gives it validity, it gives it, recognition. Now, the way that that person may actually be able to then take more ownership of those feelings.
Yeah.
Dignify them to themselves.
Yes. Yeah, that's it, man. Dang, that's good.
You said it. Okay. Okay, so we're just going to speak about one other principle here, and Coolidge, please. This is use of self. So when and how is it most beneficial to actually draw from our own experiences, our own feelings, our own take on a situation? Because it's not like it isn't there. We are also within spiritual care, it's beneficial to actually observe. You can be listening kind of on two tracks. You're listening to that person, and you're also just being a little aware of like, okay, what is this bringing up within me? What am I feeling? Am I feeling frustrated? Am I feeling upset? Am I feeling, curious? Am I, whatever it might be. Am I feeling tired? Am I tired? So we want to be aware of those things. So when is it appropriate to use our own circumstances? And we can say that there's explicit, explicit or apparent use of self, where someone says, I lost my friend. And then for me to also say, oh, I've lost friends too, right? That, generally speaking, we want to do quite rarely. It's kind of, because it can so easily evoke that person's sympathy toward us, and it causes them to expend a lot of energy. Of course, it's good. It's good to get in the boat with somebody, so to speak. But at the same time, it may create a sort of obligation for them to then kind of ask you about your circumstances and give you comfort, which we as human beings most certainly deserve. But in the role of a spiritual caregiver, we want to kind of turn that off, and for the most part. We're trained in a certain way where sometimes it might bring something out. For example, if someone's very, very guarded and skeptical of us, they don't want to share. Then if you share something from your own experience explicitly, I've also been through this, it might open up the dialogue. That's where it's kind of appropriate. But otherwise, we want to do this other way of doing it, which is what we call like a subtle or concealed use of self. Someone's talking to me about losing their friend. I've lost friends in my life. I'm not going to mention that, but it's okay to go into those feelings, to remember what it is that you went through, to allow those things to kind of rise to the surface a little bit, and to come up with a way of summarizing that feeling without making it clear that you've been through that thing. So for example, it's so painful to be so close with someone and to have so much more that you want to say to them and to not be able to, right? So from that, I'm entering into my own feelings of what I've experienced losing friends. But it's just serving to give voice to their experience, and they feel acknowledged and heard, and like there's understanding there.
So that's a very valuable use of self that we can offer to people. We want to join with others under any circumstance. But a lot of the way that we do that is in a way that keeps the focus and keeps the energy directed toward them. Does not kind of create an obligation for them to then switch roles. Oh, those are good. Those are all. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. Great. Okay. So then.
Let's talk about prayer and spiritual care. This is our last slide.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Wait. Am I saying something? Oh, no.
Yeah, why don't you? Go ahead.
Yeah. That's something that I I'm going to use the use of self here. When the first chaplaincy thing I did was about, like, before I started my CPD education, they told me to come in and do this thing, which is they call blessing hands. So we went to every department in the hospital, and we said, we're the chaplains and all the nurses, the ones who want, a lot of them were like, oh, I'm coming. And it means like we all pray together, and we basically pray that God guides their hands and gives them the strength throughout the day. This is a multi-faith project. This is all the chaplains went out to do this. And I remember, because they'll be like, oh Lord, we thank you for your presence. We thank you for your guidance and your mercy and your compassion. Continue to bless us with your glory and your mercy. Please allow us to be, witness to your glory, and allow us to testify to your greatness. See, look, I'm getting better. But at that point, I was like, I go to the Buddhist, I was like, because I thought I could connect with them. I was like, I was used to chanting mantras, and we memorized them. I don't know this like praying from your heart stuff. She was like, oh my God, I know, it's really hard. But it is a type of prayer that we do. And it actually is quite useful, it's helpful. I think, like I said, there are a lot of things that I learned about my own faith, realizing like, prayer, not controversial, it's true. Sometimes prayer can be an obstacle for something like we were saying, like grief. When somebody's crying and saying, like, I'm just gonna say prayer, let's say prayer. Are you saying that to feel comfortable so that you can stop this outpour of emotion? Mm-hmm. And that happens. It's like, let's just say prayer. Okay, God's gonna take care of everything. But this person is feeling intense anger. And I remember just like somebody, this very well-known pastor came in, very well-known, and then she came and let's pray, and we're all in this huddle. And I just like busted out, like incredible hope. It's like, no, he started swinging around. And the cops had to come in the middle of the prayer. So sometimes prayer is something that stops that kind of flow. So the question of what is a type of prayer, when is it appropriate, when do we pray? Yeah. But that also, what I learned is like I chant my mantras, I do my japa, but that type of prayer that's asked, speaking to God from your heart, in your words, is a very, very helpful exercise for me. I know many people might be used to it. It was something that I had to reacquaint myself with. So that is my experience of multi-faith. But I don't know if anybody here what tradition you come from, Catholics, Christians, Islam, or we're all, Hare Krishnas. Hare Krishna, we have Mahamantra. Even Catholics, Our Father, Hail Mary, these are just the prayers that are said to recite. And while it gives comfort, it might also help. I try to say something, a prayer to God in your heart. And that's the type of multi-faith prayer that I've seen that's been very helpful. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
I would just say that it has the quality of being very universal also, this type of prayer. So if we're joining with people from other traditions, we have many options. We can either offer what knowledge we have of that tradition to pray in a genuine way according to their tradition. But it's also very nice is to just join that person in prayer, allow them to be the one who leads the prayer. To say, okay, I would like to just sit with you and be with you as you pray. But in other ways, we can offer something that's universal. We can offer something that also, one of the benefits of this kind of extemporaneous, free kind of prayer is that it allows us to account for all of the different factors of the circumstance. So if we just had a 2-hour conversation with somebody where they told us names, where they told us feelings, where they told us almost everything that we would need to know to arrive at a prayer that echoes their circumstance, then we want to offer that. So in a certain way, we can bring those names into the prayer. We can bring the mood of the moment into the prayer. We can bring that person's yearnings and feelings into the prayer, and hopefully express what it is what they're experiencing and carrying with that based on what we've shared together. And as Kula said, sometimes a formal prayer in the Bhakti tradition, we might say rasa bhas, right? That it's the improper rasa, it's the improper mood for that moment. So if someone just had an immensely tragic situation in their life, we pray a prayer, God, you're so great, you're so kind, you're so care, right? Yes, okay, ultimately spiritual reality, we can feel that. But at the same time, it's not sensitive to what has just happened. And then other people, according to their cultural or traditional background, they may only want to hear a prayer about how God is great, despite what has gone on, right? So we just need to be sensitive. And this extemporaneous prayer allows us to really kind of approach it in a very need-based, patient-centered way that's kind of based on really this moment. It's being present according to this circumstance that we're in.
One last thing, I'll say it because it's something that we'll talk about in another session. But our tradition, like our tradition says the only prayer is Nama Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama. And that's true. I don't believe anything else. I believe that is the only mantra for the Lord. But in my role as a chaplain, in my role of trying to help this individual for them to understand God or to be with God, I won't disrespect their request if they want a Christ-centered prayer or multi-faith prayer. It's like, I remember when I first became a devotee, I was in the Philippines and I was a vegetarian, and my aunt and uncle thought it would be better if they slipped some meat in my food. And then he told me that later, and I thought that was very disrespectful.
Mhm.
And they were like, well, am I gonna go to hell? I was like, who? I don't, but it was like, I just felt so betrayed. I not betrayed, I felt like abused. I felt like just like I was like violent, like there was no respect. And I won't, as chaplains or as a spiritual care provider, I mean, if we're providing care for our community, we're fine. But if we're in a world where we're trying to provide care for others, I cannot take advantage of people like that and just say, I'm gonna say a prayer if they're unconscious and I'm just going to say a prayer for them. That's not like you go into a room, someone's unconscious and they have 2 big crosses on their wall, and you think, I'm just gonna chant Hare Krishna to them. In one sense, I think it's for you, like I want to give something, that's fine. But at the same time, like, the last times they were conscious was looking at that cross. And I think it's disrespectful to say, I'm going to give you something that you don't know. One, you don't know anything about. And 2, that in your heart and your soul wants, this is the prayer, this is the person you dedicated your life to. So that's a hard thing. I mean, we'll discuss it in other issues. And then there's an internal silent prayer.
Yeah, but just related to that, actually, internal silent prayer. That may be a space where we can pray in a way that is natural for us, in our case, chanting the Maha Mantra. That, so if we're entering into a room and we see that there's chaos going on in the room, family members are fighting, arguing, physically fighting, sometimes we encounter a situation like that, or someone is really severely in pain, whatever it is. Sometimes as you're entering that room, I'll in my heart or my mind chant Hare Krishna, because that's what I feel I can bring up at that moment. It's being true to myself, exactly, thank you. It's being true to my own tradition and theology. But if that person says, let's pray together, I'm not going to chant Hare Krishna. So in that way, it's a question of, what is appropriate and respectful for that person. But if someone says to me, hey, later on, I don't feel comfortable praying right now in person, but hey, later on, when you're alone, can you say a prayer for me? I'm absolutely gonna be thinking of them while I'm chanting my japa. I'm absolutely gonna be thinking of them while I'm chanting Hare Krishna. And I may also offer a personal prayer. So we have our own kind of track of prayer as we go throughout our spiritual caregiving service.
That's good.
It is good. He already said it all.
No, that is my passion. Very good.
So now, at long last, we thank you so much for your presence with us in the mood of presence. You've really been very present. And we want to give time for questions, for discussion.
Was it 5 minutes?
It's 4:58.
So are we able to?
You are able to, I have to set up for this other program, so I'm gonna have to
Okay.
pop out. That's okay.
So we just want to give it some space if anyone has any reflections, thoughts. Yes, please. Want your name?
Kendall is my name.
Kendall.
I have quite a reflection. I'll try to keep it brief. I know we're short on time. But I mean, just like, I really resonate with this whole idea of being multi-faith and being culturally sensitive. And recently in my life, I've been trying to sort of put the pieces together. Like, I mean, I'm very like openly spiritual. Like, I'm here, and like, but I also have like a pentacle and stuff, like something to like paganism and stuff too. And I mean, and I think explore like Freemasonry and things like that. So I'm just like kind of all over the place, you know, spiritually, or it may seem that way from the outside of being, but for me, it's just all these different pieces, and even like, I guess not to get too personal, but even like, you know, trying to contemplate like my, you know, my sexuality and how that plays a role, and growing up in like a more socially conservative Christian Caribbean culture. And I mean, I love my Caribbean culture too, you know, and the music and everything, and but you know, they also tend to be a bit mad when it comes to like homosexuality and things. So for me, trying to sort of figure out, well, what is my role in my spiritual development with that, and trying to, you know, trying to put all those pieces together. And so and we feel like I guess some people maybe, and not like intentionally, but people would be sometimes be sensitive towards me and say, oh, well, you know, you need to like, you know, repent that and change that. You need to just, you know, whatever, get with the woman, because that's what God wants you to do. And you know, and me not wrestling with that, and having those feelings of guilt and like not being able to really talk about that stuff with my family. And so but then recently coming to that sort of radical acceptance with myself about that, and just be like, yeah, this is who I am, and it's fine, and it's you know, and yeah, just and having that all be part of my spiritual development and my spiritual exploration. And yeah, I guess that's kind of how I can work that.
It's complicated. I mean, there's many elements to our identity. And a lot of people go through a lot of anguish reconciling. Sometimes they're conflicting. Maybe you found them, but still socially, some people give you problems and relax. But it's that is a huge part of spiritual care. I mean, a lot of us come from different cultures, and even we have a community, you know, identity issue. And, you know, we're in the West practicing an Indian tradition, not just an Indian tradition, a Bengali Indian tradition. So it's very specified. And so part of like, well, theology, part of care, theology also is trying to make a balance between all of these aspects. Every theology has so many aspects to it. Christianity isn't just Christianity. Where'd that bunny come from? You know, there's this trail now. There's a lot of things that we just take for granted. Like, oh, that's Christianity. No, it's not that simple. And so, yeah. Anytime you want to, you know, talk and share, I would say share. Don't feel also alone. It's also helpful to share. Thanks for sharing.
Anybody else, any thoughts, comments, reflections, questions from all of this?
Anything online?
I asked And no one, people have been coming and going, so there's 2 left, and I posted that they should
There were no
post it,
questions.
but there's no questions posted online now.
Chat.
Yeah, nothing in the chat.
Thank you both so much for sharing. your reflections. Just something caught my attention for that you said towards the end about how, for you personally, the month is the most genuine to you, and you feel, I think you said something like, you feel like that's the mantra and those are the words for this world in this time. So I guess I'm curious, like, and this is truly out of like curiosity, when you're doing this kind of work and engaging in so many different backgrounds, and you're in a situation where someone is very clearly communicating with you, whether through words or not, that that's not what they're looking for, and they want something very different, like, how are you able to engage in that? I guess I wonder, I don't know how to fully form the question, but I think it has something to do with just like how we can keep that humility around, okay, this is what's best for me and this is what my truth is.
Yeah.
And I see that this is not your form, and how do we avoid, like, something I get really worried about, and I think, it's interesting thinking about the different ways people have described in the Christian movement, like cult or like this, like that are very, like it could be seen as almost exclusive. And religion, in a wider religion could be seen that way, so just how it can be more about separation than inclusivity and joining. So how do you keep that, like, how do you keep yourself from going to that place of separation or almost like superiority, and genuinely offer loving care to the person in front of you? Because it could just be going through emotion if you're just being like, well, I'm not gonna do this because they don't want it, and like it's all about that internal attitude. So how do you like keep both at once, knowing that this is true and that you think that that's what's right for, you said like the world, like that's what you think is true, period.
Yes.
And then really wanting to offer something to this person, not just like giving them what they need in the moment, but actually really wanting them to like experience God's love and experience something good.
I think so much. That's exactly, and that question comes up a lot, that, especially with the chaplains, that you pray this prayer with them. How did you feel? Like, you feel genuine? I asked this also in my class. So you pray for them, so like someone was like praying a Catholic prayer, but they were Christians. And a lot of the Christians think like the Catholics aren't real Christians. I was like, well, you guys are harsh to each other.
Yeah.
I said, do you feel genuine? I was like, yeah, I feel genuine. I mean, in their cases, like, we're praying to Christ. I believe. Now, as far as a lot of my patients are Catholic, of course, I was raised Catholic. The theology we have is, and that was something I was talking to Dean about. I'm scared. I'm a little nervous about this because I'm worried that now I'm putting myself out there and publicly to say something. What do I say wrong? I believe in our theology. I do believe the Holy Name is the best thing for everyone. I don't think everybody wants the same God, the same religion, the same theology. It won't. I do believe God reveals himself in different ways. And I want to give them how God is, they inform me how God revealed him to them. And I want to give that back to them. It's a genuine yes. One, because I was also indoctrinated into Catholicism, so like I remember the prayers, but also because it does not affect my theology. I still do think that the Holy Name, the type of relationship, the type of theology that comes from our tradition is different from the theology and the destination of Christianity. That the destination of the both of our tradition is what I want in my spiritual life. It's not what they want. Their idea, their theology is very different. At times I feel like, oh man, it's so beautiful. But this is where I said there's this area where all the chaplains agreed on these things. But when we went home, we were in different worlds. And like, even though I looked, I wish I like when I even read like Christian theologians like C.S. Lewis or St. Francis, oh man, I wish I could love God like that. Yeah. I wish I could love Jesus like that. But I can't. I mean, there's to a certain extent I can. That's the kind of like that's the kind of theology that keeps you questioning, but still having fidelity and knowing that Krishna or that there's a really extended depth in our tradition that we can go into. I don't want to remain in just this area. I do believe that we can really get along and do a lot of work with this general theology, but all of us are going to have to do this path, this individual path towards God. It's very personal. That's what I, in my heart, believe. So that's how I see it, that this is my personal path. And I am praying for you mostly probably from this area. And then it's up to that patient to take it to that other level, that individual personal level.
It seems to me that there's also space for there to be kind of a gradient for us, like in our own experience, we're trying to cultivate a kind of exclusive faith, right? And mantra and Christian, so on. We have passages like Haranama, 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 Deva Kevalam, Bhagavan, Deva, so on. There's no other way in this age but to chant Hare Krishna. So am I discounting that? Am I disbelieving that? No. But at the same time, Prabhupada also made statements along the lines of the test for someone's faith is how nicely they're developing their love for God, how nicely they're developing their love for others. So as Kula said, we may have within our own sense of what is to be prioritized in this age, or at least for us. But at the same time, if we can be serving other people and developing their love for God, it doesn't feel like it's a contradiction or doesn't feel like it's in conflict. And then we also end up meeting with people who have no professed faith, or even people who are agnostic or atheist. Sometimes they want to talk to the chaplain too, in a challenging mood or just like a real casual mood. Well, what do you think about this? I don't know what to think about, you know? So in that way, just for myself personally, I'll just share honestly, it's like, not that we try to have realization beyond where we really are, but it's helpful, at least theoretically, to think of these people who we encounter as spirit souls, to know that they're on their own path and their own journey, ultimately with Krishna, ultimately with God. And in this way that we are trying to serve them in that journey, whether it's with their doubts, their questions. Like how Krishna in Bhagavad Gita says, those who are in crisis, those who are suffering, that's one variety of people who ultimately come to him. So in that way, there's sacredness in the suffering, there's sacredness in the uncertainty. So hopefully, like in that moment, we can be carrying our own theology, our own belief, which is giving us power and giving us, you know, not that we have the power, but you know what I mean, that we're connected to that power source, as it were. And then at the same time, we're celebrating that person's being on a path in some way or another, knowingly or unknowingly. So much.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So we will have more sessions, really. I think there's definitely going to be a session where we're really now merging to, or trying to connect these traditions. Like when we say, listen, what is Shravana in our tradition? What is that first aspect of process of devotion? One about the first one. Earliest process, and the second.
Yeah, no, hearing.
Shravana, okay, yeah. So first,
Hearing.
starts from Shravana. So it starts with how foundation is Shravana. And this principle we said about here. So things like that will be examined, looking at our tradition, how Shravana, things like presence too, the same way.
And the intention is that the next session will be one where we're entering more deeply into some of these techniques, some of these practical methods that we spoke about, and actually practicing them together.
We have one comment from online from Evan who said, a bumblebee knows where its hive is, but she finds nectar everywhere. Yes.
I like that.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for our first ever. There'll be one every month. And I am hoping we will also be able to have a little practice at the Rafa Yatra. I'm gonna hopefully we'll have a tent where we can use these listening skills to listen to people who just want to be heard. So we're not just hopefully learning, but figuring out how to put them in action. So thank you very much, Dina Bandhu and Kula Pradeep. Thank you very, very much for this series. Thank you everyone who joined us online. And this will be this will be on the Bhakti Center YouTube sooner or later, meaning by the end of day Monday.